So I think we've covered every type of focus method I can think of. And the last one to do is zone focus, or nature's autofocus, basically. There's a sort of optical phenomenon that takes place with lenses when they're at certain apertures and certain distance marks are set on them. So what we do, I'll go through a lens on the table and we can have a look at how hyperfocal distance works and zone focusing works. And then I'll come back because there's a big thing you need to understand with zone focusing. You need to understand how to estimate distances. So let's look at the lens, let's go through it, and then I'll come back and I'll talk a bit more. Okay, so here we are. I've got a Yashica 28mm CY mount lens here, and we'll just go through how it works, how zone focusing and hyperfocal distance works. All right, so we've got aperture stops here, another like focusing marks here, which are obviously measurements, and then our standard measurements at the front. I suppose it could be called the scale focusing marks. Anyway, so to do this, you just set the appropriate aperture. I'm going to put it on f8. Now, if I move around the focus ring and put 1 meter on 8, everything will be in acceptable focus between 1 meter and 8 there. So that's just over 2 meters, 3 meters maybe. So everything will be in acceptable focus between those 2 points. And this basically happens, so if I put it on f11 and then move my 1 meter to 11, everything will be in acceptable focus from 1 meter all the way around to just over 4 meters. What's that, 5 meters maybe? So there's a huge space there of acceptable focus, and obviously that dead center is your critical focus, where it's most in focus as such. So at just under 2 meters away, between 1.5 and 2 meters, will be perfectly in focus. So, but you've got this huge space of what's called acceptable focus. And it's that simple. The higher up, obviously, the aperture you go, you get refraction, and you don't really want to go to like f16 to do it, but it does give you gigantic. So that's now in focus all the way from 1 meter when it's on f16 all the way to infinity. But obviously, you get problems doing that, and obviously you need a lot of light to do this. Obviously, zone focus isn't great at night, but it's brilliant during the daytime. So that's the zone focus part. Hyperfocal distance, sort of similar, an extension of it. So I put it on f8, and now if I roll round infinity onto the 8, everything will be in focus from basically just underneath 2 meters. Your hyperfocal distance is the red line in the middle, which is the critical focus, all the way out to infinity. So it's a little bit of, it's like a longer version of the zone focus. Same thing, if I put it on f4, right down here, f4, so basically everything from just under 4 meters all the way to infinity will be in focus, the acceptable focus, and then obviously your hyperfocal distance is that where that red line is. Now, last thing whilst you're on the lens, you can see there's a red dot here. This is for focusing infrared. Now, this is how you do it, infrared photography. So I'm focusing, I'll put it on f8, doesn't matter about the other marks. I'm going to shoot some infrared film. I'll put it on 2 meters and I'm in focus. So now, to focus for infrared, I know it's 2 meters, I have to move the 2 over to the red dot, and now I'm in focus for infrared film. So because of the shift in wavelength when you shoot infrared, the focus doesn't work the same. So you basically take a reading in normally, and then you move it. So say my object was 1 meter away, I lined up 1 meter, split prism's fine, everything's in focus for standard film. Now if I move the 1 to the red dot, okay, now I'm in focus for infrared film. Sometimes you see an R on there, red dot. Obviously that dot moves around depending on the focal length of the lens. But there you go. So that's zone focus, hyperfocal distance, and how you you do your focusing for infrared film. Okay, so that's zone focusing, hyperfocal distance, and also I've explained how the infrared measurement works on there as well. Now the thing is, obviously it's great this, but you need to be able to guess distances really well. If you don't know what a meter looks like, or 3 feet, then you're going to have some trouble. So it requires a bit of practice, this, but it is, after a period of time, you can do this quite easily. It's like estimated distance. So the way that I find it easier, and then, actually I'll explain something first. When you estimate the distance on with a camera, you need to do something. You need to basically do it with your eye, first of all, and then bring the camera up to your face to check. What you don't want to do is to start to imagine the camera in front of you, and then you start to guess the distance from the front of the camera, because distances of lenses are taken from the back of the film plane or the sensor, and there's a mark. This I'll flash up a picture. This Nikon F100 has it. It's called phi. It's like a circled line thing. That's the film plane, so that's the actual focal point. So when you do start to teach yourself distances, you need to only use the camera to check. So let me give you an example. So this Leica R4 here, it's got the pi symbol at the back. So what you do is you look at an object and you go, okay, I think that's a meter. And then you can put a meter on the camera, and then you can bring it up and check if your split prism matches. So you keep doing that because it's easier to sort of visualize one unit, and then you can double it in your head, and then you can triple it. So you know what 3 meters or 12 feet looks like. I mean, imperial or metric, whatever suits. So yeah, so it's really important to do that, because you need to know sort of and understand distance. You see a lot of like videos online or comments online, people with Olympus trips and cameras like that basically have those 3 modes. It's like a head and shoulders, group of people, mountains, and they can't figure out why their pictures aren't in focus. So with those, you need to like look at the manual that says, okay, everything over 6 feet is in focus. And you can sort of see from doing this with the lenses, with hyperfocal distance and basically zone focusing, that's how they sort of work. There's predetermined places where it will be critically in focus, but there's obviously a space beforehand where it's acceptably in focus. But you need to know how to do distances. So that's really important. I mean, one of the things though, when you start to use this, it can actually, if you're using like a rangefinder, like a Leica or something, and use zone focus in the street, it's quicker than autofocus, because you know your distance and you can fire from down here, for example, and shoot. Now, if you're doing that with an autofocus camera, first of all, you don't know what the autofocus has decided to pick. Then it's got to actually sort of like, if it's got a shutter, it's got to do the shutter with it. Obviously with the Leica or any kind of rangefinder, there's no shutter, so there's literally no lag. So you press the button, start. So that's one of the reasons they're really popular for street photographers as well. You can zone focus, click away, and it's instantaneously taking your photograph. Even with the modern autofocus cameras I discussed in autofocus, there's lots of problems. What's it going to pick? How's it going to do it? Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, it doesn't know. It's sort of trying to be clever for you, but the easiest way to do it is with zone focus. So even on large cameras, even like modern cameras today, you can still use this technique. If you're not sure if your autofocus is going to pick it up, you know that distance. Obviously, if you've got like millions of points, it could grab something over there. It could do this. So it's a really, really handy method to understand. And obviously when you're like, you have to be, as I sort of said, 35, 28, going down that direction to use this properly, you start to get into the realms of like deep focus, where you're at f8 and everything's in the shot. Now, it is funny. The world's changed quite dramatically. It's sort of like everybody wants to shoot at f1.2 and blow the backgrounds out and not see things. And then you hear them referring to like making movies and doing things like, this is for cinematography really, like the great directors. Now, most of the great directors, a lot of the great directors used deep focus or f8 or anywhere like that on their films. There's a really good example of this. There's a Stanley Kubrick film called Full Metal Jacket. If you watch through that movie, how much stuff is shot with deep focus, you can see everything. And it is funny today that the world seems to be fixated on really fast apertures and really small, large apertures, and basically blowing backgrounds out and stuff like that. When you start to shoot using f8, f11, and you start to see the whole picture, you'll understand what those, like Steven Spielberg did it for Saving Private Ryan. I think Orson Welles was doing it he did massive deep focus on Citizen Kane. So, do you know what I mean? And people are trying to, you know, make their movies, I mean, this cinematography part again, not photography, make their movies look like a Spielberg movie or a Kubrick movie. You really need to, like, you don't need super fast lenses, you need a really good f8, you need to measure. On a film set, they don't use autofocus. They measure from the back, from high to where the actor's going to stand. They bring a stand in, they light it, and then they shoot it. So it's all done with tape measures, or, you know, they're not going to use a digital rangefinder, are they? Point laser beams at actors. So, you know, that's all tape measurement. But also incorporate now, if you've got like f5.6, f8, and you're shooting in that zone, if the actor's moving around, they've got space to still stay in focus, acceptable focus for a shot. It is interesting. It's sort of like, it seems to be one of these things where everybody wants to shoot at really, you know, large apertures and things like that with these videos I see online. When, you know, if you just open up the camera to like f8, where obviously as well between f's, you know, like f4 to f8 is like normally optimal on any lens, unless it's like a super duper one. So you're going to get the best picture in that gap. Anyway, so that's a quick ramble about cinematography as well there. I don't know how that got in there. But yeah, so zone focus, it's brilliant. I use it all the time. I mean, I've just set this camera up on zone focus again, like I did another video. I just literally put it on f8 and I know exactly how far I am away, and off we go. And so it's like really, really handy. And understanding distances is critical with this. If you shoot old rangefinders, you know, the trips and stuff like that, you need to learn distances. Also, learning distances helps with lighting. You know, it sort of, light falls off. If you understand the distance light falls off, that's incredibly useful as well. So yeah, so anyway, I can't think of any other ways to focus cameras. I'm sure there is, I mean, you know, but I hope that the 4 videos, autofocus, rangefinders, focus screens, and this, which is about the zone focus, has been useful. Anyway, thank you for watching.